everyone. Today I would like to talk about phase, basically what it is and how I personally understand it. Just a heads up, I'm not a professional. I don't know much, but I gathered some information from all the sources online, so you can do it as well. And I'm just gonna try to simplify everything and explain as best as I can without using any kind of math formulas or basically any numbers. So if you know stuff about tuning cars, just skip this video. This video is not for you. This video is for people who literally don't know anything and just want to start understanding and doing things. Okay, so we're gonna start with the simple things. What is phase? No, I'm not gonna go there. Basically, phase is a relationship between two signals. Yeah, so in our case, if we look at a car, it's a relationship between speakers or between sound waves that are coming from a single speaker. Okay, so let's look at this. If we take, for example, two speakers, yeah, they produce sound by moving. So if we take, for example, this orange line, and we can imagine that this is just a speaker moving out and in, out and in, and it moves very fast, and it pushes air, and it makes air pressure, and it makes sound. So if we have two speakers and they play in phase, that means that at the same time both of them are either out or in, they produce a bigger signal combined. Yeah, if they are out of phase, the sum, the blue line, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller until they are totally out of phase, what we call like 180 degrees out of phase. That means one is in, one is out, and the sum is flat. So this is very simple example that you can try it yourselves. If you have a enclosure with two subwoofers, wire them out of phase, one plus to plus, minus to minus, the other one plus to minus and minus to plus, and play music, and basically you're gonna have zero bass because they cancel each other out. Okay, an easy example, real life example, is imagine two people pushing a car. Yeah, if both people are pushing the car is going somewhere. If one of them is pushing and the one is pulling, the car is not going to go anywhere. Yeah, because you're literally fighting each other. If the speakers are slightly out of phase, yeah, you can see, you can still have that signal. So it's very similar, like if one person is pushing hard and the other one is pushing less hard or pulling a bit, the car is going to move much slower. Yeah, so this is basically a relationship between two speakers or the same speaker. Okay, so we're going to look at practical examples, and we're going to look at my measurements that I made in REW in my car, and we're going to look at my bass response. Yeah, so this, if you haven't seen this graph before, is basically a frequency response, and you have frequency on the bottom, which is like 100 hertz, 1000 hertz to 3000 hertz, and here you have the level, the sound pressure. So these numbers don't mean anything because it's not calibrated, so don't look at them at all, but the main thing is just how this line is changing. So why am I talking about a single speaker response if I just mentioned that phase is a relationship between two signals? Because one speaker makes one sound wave, correct? Kinda yes. If you think about how sound moves in a car, you have a thing which is called reflections. So a sound wave is coming from a speaker and it can bounce back from the rear window, the front window, the side, like the passenger side, and the roof and the floor, and it comes back to the listening position. Okay, so these dips and peaks are caused by this. If I have two sound waves that are coming out of phase into my listening position, the sum is going to be nothing. That means that, for example, if you take, for example, this part, yeah, is 68 hertz. I'm going to remove the smoothing so we can see a bit better. So this is particular is 73 hertz, yeah. So at 73 hertz, my car has a what we call a null. That means that sound wave is coming from a speaker to my listening position, and another sound wave is bouncing back from, I guess in this particular case is my rear window, and it's coming back to the listening position, and they cancel each other out. Now, how do I know that this is caused by a reflection from my rear window? If I take this frequency, 73.4, let's say 73 hertz, and I'm gonna go here, 73 hertz, I'll calculate. It tells me that the length is of the sound wave is 4.7 meters of 73 hertz. So 4.7, if I divide it in half, that's half a wavelength, is 2.35 meters, which is roughly the distance between my head where I'm listening and the rear window of my boot. Yeah, so this is a cancellation lengthwise. If I take, for example, this peak, which is a massive peak, 133 hertz. Let's have a look. 133. It's 2.6, let's say. 2.6 divided by 2 is 1.3 meters. So this is the distance between me and the passenger side window, the passenger side door. So this cancellation is caused by the sound wave coming directly to me and one bouncing back from the side, the passenger side door, and they cancel each other out. So these two cancellations, they are very, very common and are apparent in all the cars. So probably I didn't mention, this is the driver's side mid-bass driver in my car. Yeah, so every driver's side mid-bass driver will have these two cancellations. Now this one is going to depend on the length of the car. If the car is shorter, this cancellation is going to be a bit higher. It might be 80, it might be 90. If the car is longer than mine, it's going to be probably lower in frequency. And this one will depend on the width of the car. So since all the cars are very similar width, you have this cancellation in roughly 130, 150 hertz region. Very, very similar. Okay. Now all of these, the other ones, they are as well caused by cancellations. And I don't know, maybe one wave is bouncing back from the ceiling, from the roof. Of course, it's going to be absorbed a lot, or from somewhere else. But these, all of these, are caused by waves arriving at the listening position that are out of phase completely or slightly out of phase. Now, just to make sure, how do I know that these are cancellations and not a problem from a driver itself? It's very easy to check. If I take a frequency response of my driver that is near field, that means I stick the mic just in front of the driver and I measure the response, and this is a green line, so it's literally like half an inch from a driver measured. Yeah, so as you can see, this response is very flat. I mean, it's not flat, it's smooth. That means there's no big dips and peaks. And I know that these two, for example, 70 and 150, are caused by cancellations and not by the drive itself. If we take, for example, this one, the green one, the dip in the green one, it's 630 hertz. My guess is gonna be a resonance problem. Maybe my door vibrates at 630 hertz, and that's why there's a little dip. Okay, so this is a single driver response. Now if we take two drivers and measure their response, so the phase issues can happen between the drivers left and right, if you take, for example, left mid bass or right mid bass, or at the crossover point between, for example, mid range and the tweeter. So now let's take, for example, my tweeters. These are EQ'd, and these are my mid range. We're gonna zoom in a bit, and this is a crossover point. Okay, so the only thing that you need to know, you don't need to know the degrees, how many degrees it changes depending on the slope or the type of the crossover. The only thing you need to know is that phase changes with the driver's roll off. Okay, so it just like if you have a wheel, it just rolls off, so the phase as well is just rolling off, so the phase changes. What you need to do when you have crossover points is make sure that the rollover, the slope, is both for the same, for the drivers the slope is the same. So if I show you the sum of these two, as you can see, the sum is not flat. These crossover points are I believe it's 2.3K at 24 dB per octave linked with Riley. So in theory they should sum flat, and they don't. Now why? Because these slopes are not 24 dB. Simple as that. How do I know that? Let's take the tweeter. I'm gonna go to EQ. Okay. And this is basically, you can set up your EQ to 24 dB, and this and this. So I'm gonna raise it up a bit, 25. There we go. So this, the dark blue line, is the theoretical 24 dB slope, and the light blue line is my frequency response. So my tweeters have a crossover point which is steeper than 24 dB. It's like more like, I don't know, 30, yeah, it's 30 dB per octave. Yeah, it's not 24 dB. If we take, for example, the mid-range, and we're going to do the same. So let's take a speaker driver, that's 2.4. This one a bit higher, 23. Link with Riley, 24 dB. There we go. Again, nowhere close. 24 dB slope. It's much steeper. There's a 30. There we go. It's much steeper slope than 24 dB. Yeah, and since the phase rolls off in different magnitude, let's say, yeah, the phase is different for both of these. They're not the same. That's why it doesn't sum flat. If you would have exactly the same slopes for the tweeter 24 and for the mid-range 24, then it would be flat. Yeah? That was very important to have matching slopes, and if you want a flat sum, they have to be 24 dB slope for Linkowitz-Riley. Okay. Now I mentioned that when the slope rolls over, the phase changes. It doesn't mean, it doesn't matter if the slope is acoustical or electrical. Yeah, for both of them. Basically every variation in magnitude, in dB, will result in a frequency, in a phase change as well. Now, why is it important to match, let's say, left and right speaker to make sure their frequency response is the same? So, just for this particular example, just ignore that this is this. Let's assume that these two lines, the brown one and the green one, represents let's say left mid-range and right mid-range. It doesn't matter which one. It's just going to be an exaggeration. If you have a frequency response which is like this part, yeah, the drivers follow each other. When one is playing a bit louder, the one is quieter, louder, quieter, and this is fine. So this variation between this and this point, you're not going to hear it, and the drivers are going to be fine. If you're going to have a situation like this, now let's exaggerate. Let's say that this difference is, let's say, 5 dB. Yeah. So the drivers, they're going to sum flat. When they have a sum, they're going to be flat. However, one of them is going to be louder, another one is going to be quieter. That means that your center image, which should be in the center, is going to be pulled to one or the other side. Okay, so in this particular case, if you're going to play a frequency, let's say 1543 Hertz, that tone is going to be right in the middle of your sense image. If you're going to play a tone which is 1637 Hertz, yeah, it will be shifted to one side, because one speaker, one mid-range, is going to play a bit lower, this one, and the other one a bit louder. Yeah, so that's why when you have these kind of wiggles in the frequency response between left and right drivers, your center image is floating left to right, and it might not be clear, as people say, fuzzy, that kind of stuff. That's why you need to make sure when you EQ, to EQ the drivers so that they would follow one another. It's not that important, the difference between like the highest and lowest peaks and dips, but the main thing is to follow each other. That's why it's exactly the same for the crossover point. Yeah, left and right should follow this crossover point, because if one of them is going to go like this and the other one is going to be like this, they're going to sum somewhere in the middle, but one of them is going to be louder than the other. Yeah, and it's the same for tweeters and mid-range. So you can see this, for example, a little peak over here, it shows up here as well, because when they sum, it's going to be a bit bigger. So now the main question is, what can you do? How can you solve these phase issues? So the main thing is setting the crossovers right, that you would have the correct slope, and making sure that the both drivers have exactly the same, or as close as possible, the frequency response. Now, what can you do about these cancellations? That's a mid-bass driver in the door. Yeah, what can you do about these? You cannot EQ them. If you will EQ them, this is not going to change, because if you're going to push, let's say 7 dB EQ into this point, you think you're going to raise it, but since this is caused by a reflection coming from passenger side, that reflection is going to be strong as well, and they're going to cancel out each other, exactly the same as in lower power. So basically you're pushing more power into this point, 130 hertz, but you're not going to get any output of it, like you cannot hear it anyway. The driver is working harder, you're going to push it to its maybe X max limits, especially on here on 70 hertz, you're going to push it to X max limits, but you're not going to hear it, so it's pointless. Yeah, so you cannot do anything about it. So what can you do? The only thing that you can do is to change the driver's location, to move it, because if you would, for example, take this frequency response in another place, because this is measured where my head is in the listening position in the driver's seat. If I would take this frequency response, let's say 3 inches in front of my nose, it would be different. These dips would be at different frequencies, they would move. And it's exactly the same if I take behind my head as well, they're going to move. So you need to change the driver position, where to change, where to put it. One place is to put in the kicks. Yeah, so this is my response of the same driver, just move to the kicks, and as you can see, I moved it like maybe a foot, maybe less, in front of the kicks, and as you can see, the frequency response is totally different. Yeah, so I still have cancellations here, 340 and 530, but they don't matter because I cross my mid bass at about 300, and maybe later I'm gonna cross it at 200, 250. It depends on what mid range I'm gonna have. So this is the bottom part, the lower frequency response. Don't look at it because my drivers now are in the kicks in literally a shoebox size volume, and it's a sealed, so I haven't vented them yet. They're not in IB, they're not ported, they're nothing, so that's why you have a massive peak. That's what happens when you put a driver in a small sealed enclosure. So this doesn't really matter, it's gonna be extended when it's gonna be vented. But this, you can see the peaks are in totally different position. So now I don't have that this one, yeah, 130. It was a massive problem. Now it's not there. If I'm gonna EQ it flat, there's not gonna be a dip in there. They're gonna be totally fine. So move it. Now this one I hope is gonna change as well, because now it's just falling off a cliff. But if I'm gonna vent it, so outside probably is gonna change. I hope so, it's gonna change. Yeah. And in my particular car, I'm gonna show you a subwoofer. This is my subwoofer response. I'm gonna zoom into this section and I'm gonna remove the smoothing just to see. And you can see 70 to 75, exactly the same dip, massive dip. And this, I think, is because of the length of the car, and my subwoofer is just behind the rear seat, so the only way how I can change it, I think, is to get rid of the spare wheel and put the subwoofer in there, and hopefully this dip is gonna shift to maybe 90 or 100 hertz, and then it's gonna be less of a problem when I will need to integrate it into the front. So the only thing that you need to take from this on a very basic level is to know that frequency response, when frequency response changes, the phase changes as well. That's why you want to have the frequency response as flat as you can, crossover points as matching as possible. When you match them, the phase, they're gonna be in phase, what we call, and they're gonna sum flat and nice. When you're gonna match the frequency response of left and right drivers, they will be as well in phase, and they're gonna match, and it's gonna be flat. The sum is gonna be flat. Yeah. So I don't know if you learned anything from this. I hope it was useful for at least a few of you, because like half a year ago, I would be very, very happy if somebody could do this video and just explain this thing in very simple terms and just literally show me what it looks like and what causes it and that kind of stuff. So I hope it helped you. If it did, great. I touched a few topics like crossover points, electric slope with acoustic slope, and integrating the drivers together. I might do a few more videos, I don't know. This is the first one that I ever did, and I hope it helped you, and thank you for watching.